What is going on, everyone? Thanks for checking in our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and today we're going to head down to Florida where Governor Ron DeSantis is finally acknowledging what voters have been saying for years. Ready for this? Floridians overwhelmingly support legalizing cannabis, but he's still not budging. So with that, why admit this now? Why concede that voters want reform, but double down on opposition? And really, what's the strategy behind the timing in all this? So lots of moving parts here. So let's get into our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. All right, let's begin. According to a new report from Marijuana Moment, DeSantis recently admitted publicly that marijuana legalization is popular with Florida voters. But in the very same breath, he made it clear he still opposes legalization, calling parts of the ballot initiative misleading and warning that legalization could cause Florida to smell like marijuana everywhere. We've heard this many times from him. He's also repeated one of his favorite lines, quote, "I didn't do it to be popular. I did it because it was the right thing to do," end quote. So no pivot here. He's recognizing the will of the voters, but he's refusing to change the course. So really that sounds contradictory, but politically it actually is pretty calculated. And here's why. Well, let's first start with the timing. Florida, it just came off a massive push for Amendment 3 last fall, which would have legalized adult use cannabis statewide. The measure got 56% support. It was a solid majority, but not enough to clear Florida's 60% supermajority threshold for constitutional amendments. And DeSantis knows that. He knows most voters support reform, and that public opinion is trending in one direction. So when he acknowledges that popularity now, he's not changing sides. He's actually getting ahead of this narrative by saying, quote, "I know voters support it, but I still think it's wrong," end quote. He's trying to frame himself as principled, not out of touch. He wants to appear rational, even sympathetic to public sentiment, while keeping control over how legalization might eventually happen. So in short, I think it's a hedge. He's conceding reality, but he's also refusing to let reform movement define it. And that then brings us to the bigger political move. DeSantis isn't just rejecting legalization, he's trying to own it on his own terms. Make no mistake here. Think of it like this. By criticizing the ballot language, he's not attacking cannabis itself, he's attacking the process. He's saying, I don't oppose reform, I oppose this version of reform. In the past, he hasn't said that, but maybe now he is. So really that gives him flexibility now. If political winds shift further, he can claim he was never anti-cannabis, only anti-poor policy. And many people that follow this space can read through that, but for those that don't, they won't really. So really it's a classic play for control. He's shaping the conversation from should Florida legalize to if Florida legalizes, who's in charge? And make no mistake, control is the real issue here. DeSantis has built his brand on centralizing authority in education, corporate governance, and even local ordinance. He's not about to let the cannabis industry or a voter-driven amendment dictate the terms. That's not how he works. So really, this isn't about being tone deaf. It's about owning the timing, the rollout, and the narrative. Sound familiar in other places as well? So before we dive into what this means for the industry, here's a quick word from our friends over at Morgan & Morgan. Hey everyone, there's a reason smart investors celebrate when their portfolio jumps 40% in a year, just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. Think about it. When you're investing, you want the right team in your corner. The same is true if you're injured in dealing with an insurance company, and that is where Morgan & Morgan comes into the equation. Why? Well, they've got more than 1,000 attorneys in over 100 offices nationwide, and they've been fighting for people for over 35 years, and their track record is hard to ignore. Let me explain a little bit further. Case in point, in Florida, a client was offered $350,000, but walked away with $12 million. In Pennsylvania, another client, they turned $650,000 offer into $26 million. That's a 40x return. So in total, Morgan & Morgan, they've recovered more than $25 billion for over 500,000 clients. So really when you hire him, it's like bringing in a legal army that has your back. Because if you're injured due to someone else's negligence, you deserve to be paid. And let's be honest, not all law firms are created equal. But with Morgan & Morgan, their fee is free unless they win. You can start your claim right now by clicking the link in the description below or by scanning this QR code on your screen with your phone. At the end of the day, if you want what you deserve, make sure you go in with the right team by contacting Morgan & Morgan today. Now, let's get back to the rest of our video. Picking up where we left off in Florida, what could this all mean for the industry and for you, the investor? So first, let's be real. As we know, cannabis stocks today, they are a government reform trade. Momentum lives and dies on political headlines, and DeSantis, he just added a layer of uncertainty to one of the largest untapped markets in America. Yes, big medical market, but rec, massive. As we know, Florida right now has 800,000 registered patients, and multi-state operators like Trulieve, Curaleaf, and Verano, they have major infrastructure already in place. So the question investors are asking is simple. If DeSantis keeps blocking adult use, then what happens next? Well, what happens next is his time as governor is almost done. But outside of that, short term, it's a pause. Companies will focus on optimizing medical operations and really lobbying behind the scenes, which we continue to hear and see. But longer term, pressure builds. The public perception across the state is growing. We saw the 56% threshold, and that could grow even more. So that will put pressure on the state economically. And also remember, Florida has 23 million people in one of the strongest tourism economies in the country. That's billions in potential tax revenue just sitting right now on the sidelines. So really at some point, acknowledging popularity but blocking progress becomes politically unsustainable. So DeSantis may be playing in some ways the long game here, but that game, it has a time limit indeed. And also here's another angle. He might be watching the early stages of a Republican realignment on cannabis. All eyes on Washington, right? DeSantis isn't the only conservative acknowledging voter sentiment while rejecting policy execution, because we're seeing a pattern here. Republican leaders in multiple states, like from Texas to PA, they admit the public wants reform, but argue they'll do it the right way. So really this is about positioning, not opposition or opposing. They may want to rebrand legalization as a law and order issue. Regulated, contained, controlled, not a progressive free-for-all. So with that, DeSantis' comments could actually be a preview of how the GOP mainstreams cannabis reform. Acknowledge demand, then seize control of the rollout. And if that does happen, then we know the next wave of legalization may not come from the left. It may come from a Republican governor who decides he wants to design the system himself. That pretty much fits Governor DeSantis' personality. So getting back to my original point, why admit this now? Because in some ways, it could be politically smart. It distances DeSantis from the culture war framing of old while keeping him in the conversation for future national moves. Remember, 2026 is an election year for Florida legislatures, and 2028 isn't far off for national ambitions, though I don't think there's any chance he'll be the 48th president of the United States. But regardless, he may view this differently, and by showing that he gets where the public stands, he appeals to moderates without alienating conservatives who fear a full-blown commercial free-for-all. So this could be not indecision, it could be about collaboration. And it tells us this: every opponents of legalization are starting to prepare for a post-prohibition future. They're just making sure that they're the ones writing the rules when it does happen. So here's my takeaway. DeSantis isn't afraid of cannabis. He's afraid of losing control over cannabis. And from a policy perspective, that's where the real fight is headed. Not if legalization happens or not, but who gets to decide what it looks like. He's framing it as a question of governance, not morality. And in today's political climate, that may be a smart move. But there's a cost here. By blocking reform now, Florida continues to lose tax revenue to gray market alternatives and neighboring states. And the companies that have invested millions into Florida's medical program are left waiting right now, with infrastructure built, staff trained, and capital currently tied up. So based off of that, eventually the frustration, it's going to reach voters too, because every year legalization stalls, the argument that we're just being careful, it becomes harder and harder to sell, especially when over 70% of people want cannabis reform at any capacity. So when DeSantis says, I know voters support legalization, but I still oppose it, he's not making a mistake, he's making a calculated decision here. He's betting that control matters more than consensus, that voters will respect his consistency more than they'll punish his resistance. But if Florida keeps watching billions in tax revenue flow north and thousands of new jobs open in other states, that bet may not pay off for long, because as we've seen across the country many times, cannabis reform doesn't stop when one governor says no. It just waits for the next one to say yes. All right, I'm Shad Dales. This has been our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. Thanks for watching. And as always, if you're following policy and closely the markets as well, stay tuned right here. We'll keep you updated on where reform meets reality. I appreciate you all logging on here today. Make sure to give it a like, smash on that bell for all notifications. And again, greatly appreciated if you could subscribe to us here at TDR. That's it for now. Enjoy your day, and thanks for checking in, and we'll see you in the next next video. Thanks again, everyone.